Hi everyone, I'm here again to do another video as part of a response to someone who left a comment on one of the videos I did last night. They asked me what my opinion on the Tetractys spread is, and I frankly did not have an opinion because it was the first time I'd even heard of that word. But having looked it up, I did find, I believe I found the website, perhaps where this person got it from. But the Tetractys is an old Pythagorean symbol. If you play video games and you like The Legend of Zelda, it is basically the Triforce. Or rather, it is the Triforce. But obviously, it doesn't have the same connotation. So it's essentially three triangles stacked on each other so that they create one larger triangle. And of course, the triangle has always been a very important geometric symbol throughout esotericism. Three is always an interesting number to people. I mean, all you have to think of is the three persons in one Godhead, the Trinity of Christianity. That tends to be the big example of the number three. Sorry, my eyes itchy. But I thought I would do a video trying it out, the Tetractys spread. So the Tetractys spread starts at the bottom of the large triangle with 4 cards. Then above that there's a layer of 3 cards. Above that a layer of 2 and 1 top overarching card. And so the bottom 4 correspond to the 4 elements. The next row corresponds to the 3 alchemical elements, I suppose, as opposed to the 4 mundane elements. So these are salt, mercury, and sulfur. Then on the next row we have the moon and the sun, the lunar and the solar principles, or basically feminine and masculine principles. And then lastly at the top is essentially spirit. The website calls it, what the heck do they call it? They call it the one fruit, the unus mundus, or the self, the integrated psyche. And that makes sense. That would be the equivalent of Keter if you wanted to talk about it Kabbalistically. I mean, this is a spread. I see why this person mentioned this spread, because it is very similar to the spreads I was doing last night involving the Tetragrammaton, or the elemental spread for that matter, the elemental cross thing I did. So they're along the same lines. This is more of, I would say this is a slightly more in-depth spread, a little more contemplative. Not to say that the others were not, especially the Tetragrammaton one can be very contemplative, depending on how far you take it. You know, if you take the Tetragrammaton spread and use it as like looking at your personality in general, then it can become very contemplative. But if you're using it to analyze a specific situation or just a particular mood you're finding yourself in on a given day, and you want to get at the heart of why you feel that way, the Tetragrammaton spread might help you out with that. But this spread, the Tetractys spread, is again a little more in depth, and I mean, it is rooted in a specific situation, but it has a pretty large scope. So so there's a lot more to think about with it, which I like, and I really like the way that it's organized, so that you really see how the passive symbols are all on the left, the active symbols are all on the right, and the ones that go between are all in the middle. And now this may sound very similar, or familiar rather, to some of you out there. It is basically the exact same thing as the Tree of Life. And that's another spread in another video that I'll talk about. But for now, we'll talk about this one. So I'm going to do what I did last night and sort of mirror it for you. I do my best to mirror it. Now it's a fairly big spread, so bear with me if it doesn't quite fit in the table. I hope it does. I already shuffled and cut. I'm going to use the Marseille Tarot that I used last night, since I'm still getting used to it, and I've really been enjoying the readings that I've been getting with it, so it's been a nice change from the Crowley without losing any divinatory integrity. So, okay, so we're going to start. If it's facing you, you're going to start at the bottom row and start from the left going to the right. So you're always moving left to right in the spread. So for me, I'm going to be moving right to left because I'm mirroring it. So for the bottom row, we're going to start with the principle of earth, I believe it is, right? You start with earth, then you do water, then air, and then fire. And we'll see how this all connects. So for earth first, we have the tower. I have to go back and forth between this silly website. There we go. Okay, so we have the tower here for the element of earth. And this is essentially the physical aspect of the situation, or the material aspect of the situation, how the body is connected to the particular situation. Next we have the element of water. So now for water I have the Nine of Cups. Oh, how nice is that? Lucky me. And then we have the element of air. Oh, of course, cups are the emotive side of this. Air is the intellectual, and I have the Queen of Swords. Very fitting card to have there. And then fire is the creative or the spiritual, and for that I have the Queen of Pentacles, which is interesting. As you may notice, she is coming up in my readings a lot lately, which is kind of interesting, as is the Tower. The two of them are coming up quite often. So anywho, so I would suggest that, well, it's probably good to read each row as you draw it, and then connect it all together later when they're all drawn. So I would say for my physical end of my situation with the tower, you know, I mentioned in a previous reading that I am trying to lose attachment to old habits, old certain materialistic aspects of my life. And so that, I think, speaks to that. Emotionally, I do definitely feel the Nine of Cups, almost as a result of this as well. Logically, the Queen of Swords is also very interesting to have here, because from a Crowleyan perspective, Alistair says that the Queen of Swords represents, well, she can represent the shedding of the ego and the logical understanding of what is wrong with the ego. It is the convergence of the intuition with the intellect. And so it's the intellect kind of waking up to what the intuition has been telling it and seeing it for the truth that it is. And then she is then sort of the mediator between the intuition and the intellect. And I think the Marseille Tarot reflects that mediating aspect very nicely, the way she has her hand up in kind of the medieval gesture of discussion and mediation and peacemaking. And then finally, for the spiritual end, the creative end, I have the Queen of Pentacles. And that's interesting too. I mean, I think in this case, or in this reading, I think the Queen of Pentacles represents, I mean, it can represent many things in my life right now, but I do think that I mentioned in a previous reading that I'm trying to figure out a kind of ritual praxis for myself, and particularly a physical ritual praxis, and that's just something that I feel that I need to do. So I think, you know, she could be related to that need to focus on the physical end of my spirituality and not just the the intellectual side. So, I mean, perhaps that's how these two are related. Or again, that's just the spirit wanting, the spiritual end of my mundane life, wanting to focus on that. It could be a number of things. But anywho, without boring you, the next row is the three alchemical principles. And for this, we're going to have salt, sulfur in the middle, and then mercury. I mean, excuse me, I did that wrong. Salt, mercury, and then sulfur. So again, the passive principle is on the left. The mercurial, the fluctuating principle is in the middle. And the active, the masculine principle is on the right. Okay? So now to draw for that, for salt, I have the priestess. For mercury, I have the Knight of Swords. And for sulfur, I have death. Gosh, I swear that I am shuffling these between readings. It's very funny how often I'm getting similar cards between the readings I did last night, even, and the ones I'm doing today. Very bizarre, but at least they're very consistent, and it's moments like this when we have to trust that something greater than ourselves is at work here. Anywho, so in this on this website they say to read basically these three cards as past, present, future, and the legitimization for this is that salt is the element of stagnation in as far as motion. All the alchemical elements represent a kind of motion. They represent what is it? I believe it is tamas, sattvas, and rajas. In the Hindu system, it's some combination of those. But essentially the idea of passive motion or slow motion, heavy motion, fluid motion, sort of like water and waves, undulation in other words, and then the sulfuric principle is hot, fast, explosive action that kind of pops up out of nowhere. So the idea is that those are the three possible motions in the universe that govern all change, all motion. I'm going to move this up since we're done with the bottom row. So they basically put it all together and say that this represents the past, this represents the fluid future, I mean the fluid present that is still malleable, and this represents the yet to happen future that is yet to blossom into something, into existence. So interpreting these, I would say that in the past I have been relying a lot more on my intuition, my guides, if you will. Some people call them that. I don't really know what to call them, and I'm not going to try to label them. But in general, my intuition has been playing a lot more of a role in my life recently, and just general personal spirituality. The fluid present, as represented by the Knight of Swords, I could say, I think that represents how I'm trying to find focus in things, and in general, focus in my spiritual life, but also in my career, and that is sort of going back and forth. There isn't much constancy. Constancy. Gosh, I can't talk. Sorry, it's late. It's about 1:15 or so. So that is something that I could perhaps address here. And then lastly, the future that's yet to happen is death. And now that's very much connected to the reading I did last night, in which the element of fire, or the yod of Tetragrammaton, was also represented by death. So here we have the same principle, basically, that yet to happen is this transformation, this letting go of things. Okay. Now, the last row, penultimate row, represents the lunar principle, or the feminine principle, and the solar principle, or the masculine principle. And this represents basically the two halves of the self. I'm curious what they have to say about this. Sort of am winging this. Yeah, the unconscious psyche as opposed to the conscious psyche. That makes sense to me. So for the moon, or the unconscious, I have the Two of Pentacles. And for the conscious psyche, I have the Nine of Swords, which is interesting. Especially since I don't quite relate to either of them at the moment. It's kind of interesting to me, actually. I wasn't expecting either of those. The two I sort of understand, because like I said, this is sort of a fluctuating thing, my sense of focus. And, well, it's funny. Actually, now that I think about it, that does relate. Lately I've been saying to myself and others how how you experience these kind of waves, how the sense of connection to higher things is always in flux. You go through periods of spiritual dryness and spiritual wetness, as the mystics would say. And I mean, when you have the wet periods, they're wonderful, and then when you have the dry periods, they're really quite arid. Dry is a really good word for it. It's just really bleak, and everything around you seems kind of bleak. So anywho, so I do, now that I think about it, I do understand the two of Pentacles here. That sort of flux of the intuition of the unconscious unfolding itself and then retreating in waves. The conscious mind now expressing itself as the Nine of Swords. That's very interesting too. I do think that with that has come a greater sense of, I want to say, guilt. And I don't know if this is just my Catholic sensibility, but I do, my ironic Catholic sensibility, as I'm here doing tarot, but anywho, I do think that I have experienced a greater desire for, I guess, penance, or I don't know. I think that's also coloring myself in a particularly good light, and I also think that I am kind of concerned about things in general right now. There's a lot on my mind about daily life, I guess, that I'm concerned about. Particularly I can't talk. Sorry. In terms of career, financial situations. So I think this has several dimensions to it right now for me. And the one fruit, or the root of it all, the spiritual root of it all, the last card is the Ace of Wands. And how fitting, as the ace is associated with Keter, and that is basically what this position is talking about, the spiritual root of the experience. And as the Ace of Wands, it's suggesting, well, a totally fresh direction for me. Fresh direction in terms of said career, but in life outlook, I think, as well. And I think that's really relevant, actually, and I think that sums it all up, from my perspective anyway. So now what you can do with this spread that I think is particularly cool is you can then see how each thing feeds into another thing, because it's grouped accordingly. You can see how this element breaks down into the two main categories of conscious and subconscious, and then it breaks down further into passive, mutable, and yet to come sulfuric, active, and actual motion and event motion. And then this is more, I suppose, I almost want to term this as the energy field to get really new agey on you. Um, kind of the energy field that results around your being from these events here, because these are placed in a spatial kind of a spatial time continuum, if you will, being past, present, and future. I see these more as like the literal events, and so these being below them are almost the internal results of those things as far as one's general sense of being. And that would make sense, as this is the root of one's being. This is how one actually interprets one's own being. And so in a way we have the highest being reconciled with the lowest, and that is the goal of all the occult sciences, basically. Um, so yes, so we could conceivably draw a pattern between this fluctuation and the high priestess, and in which case, I mean, that totally speaks to what I was just saying, the intuition kind of coming and going, and how that translates into the earth and water aspects, these being the two passive elements. These are, of course, the two active elements, water and air being sort of fluid, as you can imagine, and that corresponding to Mercury sort of breaking itself down into these two, but also basically being present in all of them in a sense. To some extent, because Mercury is so androgynous, but really I would say it's asking us to look at Mercury breaking down here, sulfur being broken down here, and salt being broken down here. And of course, you know, when you do this yourself, you can look at these patterns, and you know, I don't want you to necessarily force yourself to find patterns immediately. I think it's best to write the reading down. I'm sure many of you write your readings down, and I definitely write readings down, especially if I find them to be particularly interesting or thought-provoking, and especially if I just don't get it. I mean, there are many times I've had readings that I just don't get, and so I write it down and look at it about a month later. And usually at that point I have more information with which to work, and it makes a lot more sense. Okay, so I hope this answered your question and gave you another spread to think about besides Opening of the Key or Celtic Cross. Very good suggestion. Thank you for mentioning it to me. This is definitely one I'm going to keep and use in the future. Very good spread. Alright, thank you everyone. I hope you found this helpful. I know it was a little long, but these are basically tarot episodes and mini seminars at this point. If you have any questions, as usual, please leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe and all that. Alright, thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.